You ever have that feeling where the hairs on your neck stand up before your brain even understands why? Like some ancient part of your body knows you're in danger before the rest of you catches on? That's exactly what happened the second I pulled the car onto the old gravel driveway and looked over at her. I swear to you, one moment, we were laughing about the road trip playlist and fast food wrappers in the back seat, and the next, her body went stiff. Her face drained of all color, and then, just as I put the car in park, she let out this scream that didn't even sound human. It was this guttural, choked-up wail like her soul was trying to claw its way out of her chest. And I hadn't said anything. I hadn't told her what this place was. I hadn't given her any kind of warning. I just wanted to show her where I grew up. But that scream? That changed everything. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to be a normal trip home. And by the end of it, neither of us would ever be the same. Now listen, I know what you're thinking. There's gotta be some explanation. Maybe she recognized it from a movie or some déjà vu moment, right? But that's the thing. The explanation came later, and it was worse than anything I could have imagined. I want you to stay with me here, because the story I'm about to tell you, it's not just about an old house or some strange coincidence. It's about how the past can reach forward like a hand you can't see, how trauma hides in places we don't remember, and how some people are connected in ways that defy logic and science. And trust me, I'm not going to waste your time. I know why you clicked. You saw the title. You want to know what happened when I brought her to my childhood home and why she had already drawn it when she was just a kid. You're going to get your answer. But you're going to need the whole truth. Not the sugar-coated version. The real one. The one that kept us both up at night, long after we left that place. Before I go any further, let me talk to you directly. Yeah, you. You've probably scrolled past 100 videos today. Mystery stories, true crime podcasts, ghost encounters, stuff that promises chills and suspense. But this is different. I'm not some content creator trying to fake a haunting for views. I lived this. She lived it. And if you stick around to the end, you're going to see exactly why we still haven't talked about it publicly until now. This isn't just a mystery. It's a psychological mind game, wrapped in memory, fear, and something that can only be described as impossible. And if you've ever wondered about fate or déjà vu, or why certain people come into your life at the exact moment they do, then I promise you, this story is going to hit deep. I want you to feel this, not just watch it. So lean in. Block everything else out. Because the things we're about to uncover, they've been buried for a long time. It all started when we'd been dating for just under a year. Her name's Emma. Smart, grounded, funny in this really dry, sarcastic way that caught me off guard the first time I met her. We met through mutual friends at a dinner party in LA. Typical setup, drinks flowing, people talking about their podcasts and startups. And we just clicked. I wasn't even supposed to be there. Someone bailed last minute, and my buddy dragged me along. But Emma? She felt like someone I'd known for years. There was this strange comfort with her, like she knew what I was thinking before I even said it. And at the time, I just chalked it up to chemistry. You know how it is, some people you meet, and it just feels right, like the universe did you a solid for once. But looking back now, I wonder if something deeper was pulling us together even then. We dated through the fall and into winter. Emma never liked talking much about her childhood. Said it was complicated. I didn't push. We were happy. That was enough for me. But I should have noticed the signs. How she'd flinch when we passed certain old houses during road trips. How she'd wake up from nightmares in the middle of the night and not remember them. Just lie there, sweating, staring at the ceiling like it was trying to tell her something. I should have asked more questions. But you don't look for monsters when everything seems perfect. You just enjoy the calm, not realizing there's a storm forming quietly on the edge of your life. It was my idea to take her to my hometown, just a couple hours east of Sacramento, tucked between pine-covered hills and a lake that always looked like glass in the morning light. I grew up in this weathered two-story house with chipped white paint, a sagging front porch, and the same swing set my dad never got around to fixing. My parents sold it a few years back, but the people who live there now? They're family friends, and they don't mind us stopping by whenever we're in the area. I figured it would be fun. A chance for Emma to see where I came from, maybe hear a few embarrassing stories about me as a kid. I had no idea what I was walking her into. The drive up was normal. Nothing weird. We grabbed coffee, stopped for gas, sang off-key to 90s throwbacks on the radio. She seemed relaxed, more than usual. But when we started getting close, she got quiet. Not in an obvious way. More like distant. She started looking out the window a lot, fidgeting with the sleeves of her sweater. I asked if she was okay, and she nodded. Said she was just tired. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But later, she told me that something felt wrong the second we turned off the highway. Like her stomach dropped and her head went light. Like she was being pulled somewhere she didn't want to go. And then we got there. I turned the corner and the house came into view, tucked behind a rusted gate, with those same creaky steps and peeling paint. And she just froze. Didn't say a word. Her breath caught in her throat. I thought she was joking at first, like maybe she was messing with me. But then she gripped the door handle so hard her knuckles turned white, and I saw her eyes fill with tears. That's when she screamed. Loud. Sharp. Not like she was scared of the house, but like it had betrayed her. Like it was something she thought was gone, buried, locked away. And now it was standing in front of her again, smiling with teeth. I didn't understand. I kept asking her what was wrong, but she wouldn't answer. She just kept shaking her head, saying no, 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 over and over like she was trying to rewrite reality. Finally, she looked at me and said something I will never forget. I've seen this place before. I asked her what she meant. She said, I drew this house when I was 6. I used to have nightmares about it. I felt this chill crawl down my spine. I didn't know what to say. I thought maybe she was confused. Maybe she'd seen a photo of it somewhere or heard me describe it without realizing. But then, she pulled out her phone, went into her cloud archive, and found the picture. A crayon drawing, scanned from one of those childhood memory boxes parents make. And there it was, my house. Down to the leaning tree on the left side, the broken shutter on the second floor, even the crack in the front path that I used to trip over as a kid. She'd drawn all of it. 20 years ago. Before we ever met. Before we ever even lived in the same state. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be just a weekend visit. This was something else. Something buried. And what we found next, well, that's the part you're not going to believe. I didn't know what to do after she showed me that drawing. We just sat there in the car, parked under the shadow of the same old oak tree that used to drop acorns on my dad's pickup. My heart was racing. But hers? You could hear it. Literally hear it. Like her chest was a war drum. She wouldn't look at the house anymore. Her eyes kept darting to the trees, the clouds, the side mirror, anywhere but the porch. And I remember thinking maybe it was just one of those creepy coincidences. Maybe her mind had stitched together a dream, a bunch of half-memories from old books or movies, and just so happened to draw my exact house. But that didn't explain the level of detail. The side gate that squeaked when you touched it, the dog house in the backyard that had been there before I was even born. She'd drawn all of that, right down to the crooked mailbox and the initials carved into the porch railing. Things she couldn't possibly know. Things I hadn't thought about in years. We left without going inside. She said she couldn't breathe, and honestly, I was relieved to get away. I told her we'd grab a motel in town, rest, maybe talk it out later. But that night was worse. She barely said a word during dinner, just picked at her food while staring at a TV in the corner that wasn't even on. And then around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of her whispering. I thought she was on the phone, but when I turned over, she wasn't holding anything. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, talking to herself. Or maybe not to herself. Her words were quiet, but frantic. Things like, he's still there, and I told them not to go downstairs. I reached out to touch her shoulder, and she flinched so violently that she fell off the bed. After that, she finally opened up. A little. Said the dreams had started again. That being near that house was like being inside a memory she didn't remember having. Like her mind had been keeping something from her, and now it was leaking out. I wanted to believe this was just stress. Maybe she had some kind of repressed trauma, something buried from childhood that the house triggered. I even started Googling therapists in the area. But nothing about this felt clinical. It felt orchestrated. Intentional. Like something was pulling strings behind the curtain, waiting for us to show up so the performance could begin. And that's when things started to get weirder. The next morning, I got a text from an unknown number. No message, just a photo. And not just any photo. It was me and Emma, taken from behind, standing outside my old house the day before. Same clothes, same posture, same angle. But we had been alone. No cars on the road. No pedestrians. Nothing. I asked Emma if she recognized the number. She shook her head, clearly disturbed, but not surprised. She told me things like that had happened before. She'd found childhood drawings tucked between pages of books she never bought. Letters in handwriting that looked like hers, but with words she didn't remember writing. A voicemail once, from a number with her own name, whispering, "Don't let them bring you back." She'd always dismissed it as stress or sleep issues or just weird glitches.
But now?
She didn't think they were random anymore. And neither did I. We stayed in town longer than we should have. I kept trying to piece things together, digging through old photo albums and calling my parents for details. I didn't tell them everything, just said Emma thought the house looked familiar, and it freaked her out. My mom chalked it up to déjà vu. My dad didn't say much, just got real quiet and told me not to poke around too much. That was unlike him. He's the type to explain everything with logic, even when logic doesn't fit. But he didn't seem surprised. Just nervous. I asked if anything strange had happened while we lived there. He said no. But his voice cracked when he said it. Emma and I started retracing our steps, trying to figure out if maybe we'd crossed paths before. She grew up in Oregon. I grew up in Northern California. Two totally different worlds. But then she told me something I hadn't heard before. When she was 6, her family briefly lived in a rental house while her dad worked a short-term project in my town. Just for 3 months. Summer of 2001. I did the math, that would have been the same summer I started sleepwalking. I'd forgotten about that completely until Emma mentioned it. My mom had once told me I used to wander out of the house late at night, always heading toward the woods behind our property. They eventually had to bolt my window shut. I never remembered any of it. But the way Emma's hands started shaking when I told her, that was the moment we both realized, maybe this wasn't just her story. Maybe it was ours. We started looking at yearbooks, library records, even town newsletters from back then. That's when we found a name that kept popping up, Grace Holbrook. She was listed as a caretaker for the children's reading hour at the town library, which was weird because Emma said she never remembered going to the library there. But Grace Holbrook's name was written on the back of one of Emma's childhood drawings, the exact same one of my house. And the drawing had a date on it, July 17th, 2001. My stomach dropped. That was the same week I was found outside in the backyard, sleepwalking and muttering something about a girl who wouldn't stop crying. We tried looking up Grace Holbrook, but nothing came up. No obituaries, no social media, not even a DMV record. It was like she'd never existed. But the librarian, this older woman who clearly didn't want to talk, remembered her. When I asked, her face went pale. She said Grace had been hired temporarily that summer, but left without warning. Said she was too intense with the kids. Claimed they remembered things that didn't happen. That they spoke in ways children shouldn't speak. The librarian said she used to run some kind of guided storytelling sessions that made the kids cry. Said she kept saying things like, "Your story isn't over yet." Now I know what you're thinking. This is starting to sound like some viral horror TikTok urban legend or a YouTube horror story that gets passed around until nobody remembers where it came from. But this isn't fiction. And if you've ever seen someone react to something their mind can't explain, seen them physically break down from just a drawing or a word or a place they've never admitted to knowing, you know when it's real. Emma wasn't faking. And neither was I. We kept digging. Late nights, barely sleeping, following one clue to the next like the whole thing was scripted. But every answer only brought more questions. And then out of nowhere, Emma got a package. No return address. Inside was a VHS tape. Just a blank black cassette. And here's the thing, we never told anyone what was going on. No one outside the two of us even knew we were still in town. And yet somehow, someone knew where to find us. We didn't have a VCR, so we drove to a thrift store and bought the only one they had for $10. We plugged it in at the motel, closed the curtains, and hit play. And what we saw, that's where everything changed. But I'll tell you this much, it wasn't just footage. It was proof. Proof that Emma had been in that house before. Proof that I had, too. And something, was waiting for us to return. Still interested? Then stay close. Because we haven't even gotten to the part where the door opened, and someone called her name. The tape started with static, just the gritty, black and white fuzz that feels like it's reaching into your brain, trying to pull something out. Emma sat beside me on the motel bed, knees pulled up to her chest, her face pale in the light of the flickering screen. Neither of us said a word as the static gave way to an image, grainy, warped at the edges, but unmistakable. It was the interior of my childhood home. Not a photo. Not a recreation. It was my living room. The green couch with the rip down the side, the lopsided floor lamp, the old TV that took 5 minutes to warm up. But the room was empty. No voices, no footsteps. Just a slow pan across the room, like someone holding the camera was circling, watching, waiting. And then, just as the camera reached the hallway, there she was.
Emma.
Or, at least, a little girl who looked just like her. Standing barefoot in the doorway, wearing a faded yellow dress, staring dead into the lens with these wide, glassy eyes that didn't blink. Emma gasped. I felt her body go stiff next to mine. She grabbed my arm and whispered, "That was me. That's the dress I lost when I was 6. The little girl said nothing, just stood there breathing. And then, without warning, the screen glitched. The camera jolted, and a voice came through.
Low.
Male. Unfamiliar. It said, "She remembers now." Then the screen went black. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The air felt thick, like the whole room had turned into a vacuum. When we finally moved, I popped the tape out and checked the label. Nothing. No date, no handwriting, no markings of any kind. We decided right then to take it to someone. Maybe a tech expert, maybe even the cops. I didn't care. I just wanted to know who filmed it and how they knew anything about Emma's past. But when I reached for the VHS case the next morning, it was gone. Just vanished. We tore apart the room. Checked the trash, the dresser, the car, even the motel lobby security footage. Nothing. Not a trace. And the VCR? It was fried. Wouldn't power on, even though it worked fine the night before. It felt personal, like someone didn't just want to scare us, they wanted to erase the trail completely. That same afternoon, we got a visit. A woman in her late 50s knocked on our motel door. Said her name was Carol, claimed she worked at the front desk, but we hadn't seen her before. She didn't smile, didn't even introduce herself properly. Just looked at Emma for a long moment and said, "You need to stop digging. Some memories are locked for a reason." I asked her what she meant, but she just turned around and walked away. When I asked the actual front desk clerk about her, he swore no one named Carol worked there. Said we were the only guests on that side of the building. I didn't believe him. Not fully, but something in his eyes told me he was just as scared as we were. And that's when I realized we weren't just dealing with a forgotten childhood. This was bigger. This was orchestrated. We left town the next day and drove back to LA, hoping distance would bring clarity. It didn't. Emma grew more withdrawn. She started checking behind doors at night, unplugging electronics, keeping the lights on even during the day. And me? I couldn't stop researching. I spent hours every night chasing old newspaper archives, public records, anything tied to the house or that summer in 2001. That's when I stumbled on a news clipping from a tiny local paper, barely readable, scanned in low-res. It mentioned a girl who went missing for several hours one July evening. Said she was found the next day in a field, barefoot, confused, no memory of where she'd been. No name was listed. But the field? It was behind my childhood house. I showed it to Emma and watched the blood drain from her face. She didn't speak at first, just stared at the screen like it was whispering something only she could hear. Then she said, "I remember dirt," and someone humming. I asked her if her parents ever mentioned anything about her going missing. She shook her head slowly, then stopped and looked at me with this mix of fear and clarity. They wouldn't have, because when I came back, I wasn't the same. That night, I finally called my mom. I told her everything, well, most of it. Left out the VHS for now, just wanted to know if she remembered anything from that summer. There was a long pause. Then she said, "I wasn't supposed to tell you this." My heart sank. She confessed that one afternoon, when I was 7, I came home with a girl. Said we met in the trees. My parents thought it was strange because we didn't live near other kids. But I insisted we'd been playing for hours. She said the girl didn't speak, just clung to my hand like she was afraid. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. Vanished. They searched the woods for days. But no one ever reported a missing girl. They assumed I imagined the whole thing. My mom said I cried for days, kept asking when she was coming back. But eventually I stopped talking about it. And they let it go. That girl, whoever she was, she never had a name. But now I'm almost certain it was Emma. That revelation cracked something open in both of us. This wasn't just childhood trauma resurfacing. This was two people pulled together by something we couldn't name, a thread we hadn't realized was tying us together since we were kids. But not everyone wanted that thread unraveled. Because just as we were piecing things together, someone new stepped into the picture. A man named Henry Keller. He sent Emma a message through Instagram, an account with no followers, no posts, just a DM that said, "You found the house. Now find the basement." I recognized the name. Henry Keller was a maintenance worker in my neighborhood when I was growing up. Always quiet, always alone. And one night, he disappeared without a trace. His truck was found abandoned near the lake. The cops ruled it a suicide, but they never found a body. And now, here he was texting us? We traced the IP address with the help of a friend who works in cybersecurity. It led us to an abandoned library in a neighboring town, the same one where Grace Holbrook used to work before she vanished. We decided to drive out and check it ourselves, thinking maybe we'd find a clue. But when we got there, the building was boarded up. Completely condemned. Except for one small window in the back, open just enough for someone to slip through. I'm not going to lie, everything in me said don't do it. But Emma didn't hesitate. She climbed in first. And what we found inside was more than we bargained for. The shelves were mostly empty, but in the center of the room was a stack of old filing cabinets. One of them had our names on it, not just written, engraved, like it had been there for years. Inside were dozens of folders, photos, handwritten notes, dates, times, medical reports with blacked-out names, and a single map, drawn by hand, marked with one word, *return, *. But before we could read anything else, there was a noise. A door slammed somewhere deep in the building. And then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, getting closer. Emma whispered, "We're not alone." And before we could run, the light bulb above us flickered, and a voice called out. But it didn't say my name. It said hers. And it wasn't just calling her. It was welcoming her back. The sound of that voice froze us in place. Not just because it spoke Emma's name, but because it said it with this strange familiarity, like whoever it belonged to had been waiting years to say it again. The air inside that abandoned library suddenly felt heavier, thicker, like the whole place had been holding its breath until we walked in. We didn't move. We just stood there in the glow of that flickering light bulb, surrounded by folders marked with our names and documents we hadn't even had time to read, listening as those footsteps drew closer. Emma's hand tightened around my arm, and I could feel the tremble in her fingers. I glanced at the filing cabinet again, the one that held everything we weren't supposed to see, and for a second, I debated grabbing it all and making a run for it. But the moment I reached for the nearest folder, the light overhead blew out with a sharp pop, and the room plunged into darkness. We didn't scream. We didn't move. It felt like even breathing too loudly would give us away. Then, from somewhere behind the far wall of bookshelves, came this low rustling sound, like fabric dragging across wood, and a faint metallic scrape, like something sharp being drawn across tile. Emma started backing up toward the window, But the second she put weight on her foot, the floor groaned beneath us, just enough to break the silence. The footsteps stopped instantly. A pause. And then the voice again, now closer, whispering, "Not yet." That was it. We ran. We climbed out through the narrow window and didn't look back. The second our feet hit the ground, we sprinted to the car and drove, not even caring where, just away from that building. We didn't stop until we hit a gas station 2 towns over, parked behind it, and sat there in the dark, both of us catching our breath like we'd just escaped something not fully human. Neither of us said a word for almost 10 minutes. But then Emma reached into her jacket and pulled out something I hadn't seen her grab, a single photo, snagged from one of the folders. It was old, curled at the corners, black and white, but the faces in it were unmistakable. Me and her, as kids, standing in front of a building I didn't recognize. Holding hands, we stared at it for what felt like hours. There was a date written on the back in faded ink, July 12th, 2001, 5 days before Emma supposedly went missing for those unexplained hours. And that wasn't the only problem, because the boy in the photo, me, was wearing a cast on his left arm. But I never broke my arm that year. I broke it the next summer. That photo didn't just raise questions. It broke the timeline entirely. If the photo was real and everything about it felt real, then our memories were wrong. Or worse, they had been tampered with. That's when the second message came in. This time, not to Emma. It came to my cousin Nathan. He lives in Portland, hasn't seen me in years. We talk maybe once a year on holidays. But suddenly, he sends me a text in the middle of the night. No greeting. No preamble. Just, "Did you tell her about the treehouse?" My stomach dropped. That treehouse was something only he and I knew about. This old, half-finished structure we'd built in the woods behind my house when we were 10. We only used it for one summer before a storm wrecked most of it, and we never rebuilt it. I hadn't thought about it in 2 decades. I called him immediately. He answered on the first ring, voice shaky, like he was already expecting my call. Nathan said he'd had a dream. Or at least, that's what he thought it was. In the dream, he was back inside the treehouse, but it wasn't broken anymore. It was complete, fully built. The walls were painted blue, and there were drawings, hundreds of them, tacked up all around the inside. Drawings of the house. Of me. Of Emma. And in the dream, someone was sitting in the corner, watching him. Not moving, just watching. When he tried to speak, the figure raised a finger to its lips and said, "You know the truth already. You just buried it." He woke up with his hands covered in dirt. I didn't want to tell Emma about Nathan's dream, but she sensed something was wrong. When I finally did, she went quiet for a long time, then said, "It's happening to him too. Whatever this is, it's spreading." We started wondering if there were others. If there were more people connected to this somehow, other kids who lived near that house, or whose families moved away suddenly. We posted anonymously on a Reddit thread for unresolved childhood mysteries, just testing the waters. We described vague elements: the house, the dreams, the missing time, the drawings. Within 24 hours, we had over 60 replies. People claiming to have experienced eerily similar things, many mentioning a woman named Grace, or someone who taught them how to remember things they were never supposed to forget. One message stood out, sent by a user who claimed to be a former child psychologist in Sacramento. It simply read, "If you're dreaming of the library, stop immediately." That program was shut down for a reason. They never decommissioned the basement. We messaged back instantly. No reply, and the account was deleted the next day. Emma started questioning everything after that. Her childhood, her parents, even me. I didn't blame her. I had started doing the same. We both wondered if this connection between us was even real, or if it was engineered. What if we were pushed together on purpose? What if the memories we thought were ours were actually planted? Emma began pulling out old journals, flipping through every page of her childhood notebooks. One stuck out, a worn spiral-bound pad from 5th grade. On one of the pages, in shaky handwriting she didn't recognize, were the words, "Don't trust the boy in the photograph. He's not who you think he is." She showed it to me with tears in her eyes.
I didn't know what to say.
The handwriting didn't match hers, but it was clearly old and authentic. I began to wonder, was I the one who brought her back into this? Was I the threat? Or had someone made it look that way? Because if there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that nothing we remember can be trusted at face value. Especially when there are people or things trying to rewrite your past while you're still living it. And just when we thought it couldn't get any more twisted, Emma's mother called. We hadn't told her anything. Nothing about the house, the VHS, the files, the dreams. We hadn't spoken to her in weeks. But she called, crying, her voice shaking so badly, I barely recognized her. She said she was cleaning out the attic and found something. A sealed envelope tucked inside the lining of an old suitcase. It was addressed to Emma. Inside was a photo of the treehouse, with the words, "You were never supposed to leave," scrawled on the back. And in the corner of the photo, just barely visible through the leaves, was someone watching from the shadows. But when Emma showed me the photo, my legs went weak. Because the person in the shadows wasn't a stranger. It was me.
Aged.
Older. Like I had already been there, waiting for us. We didn't sleep that night. After the photo from Emma's mom arrived, the one where an older version of me was hiding in the tree line, something shifted between us. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even fear, not really. It was something deeper, something more primal, like the foundation of everything we trusted had begun to rot from the inside out. Emma barely looked at me. I tried to tell her I had no idea what the photo meant, but even I didn't believe myself anymore. Because some part of me, some part one didn't want to admit existed. Asterisk recognized asterisk the version of me in that photo. The posture. The way he tilted his head. It was me, but older. And the expression on his face wasn't one of curiosity or concern. It was anticipation. Like he'd been waiting for this moment to come full circle. Like he knew exactly how it would play out. We left the motel the next morning, threw our things into the trunk and started driving south with no destination.
Just moving.
We couldn't stay still. Emma didn't say a word for the first 2 hours of the drive. Just stared out the window, watching trees blur into a smear of green and gray. Every so often, she'd glance in the side mirror and I knew she was looking for someone, asterisk something asterisk, trailing us. And the worst part? I was too. Because I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Like ever since that photo surfaced, we'd crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Like we'd been noticed. That night, we stopped at a roadside diner just off the 5 freeway, one of those old 24-hour places where the coffee tastes like ash and the walls still have faded jukebox song cards from 30 years ago. It was almost empty, just a couple truckers in the corner booth and a waitress, who kept glancing at the door like she was expecting someone who never showed. Emma went to the bathroom. I sat at the counter, staring into a mug of lukewarm coffee, trying to piece everything together. That's when my phone buzzed. No number. Just a message. It read, "Stop pretending you don't remember." That was it. 6 words that shattered me. Because that was the same phrase Emma whispered in her sleep the night after we saw the VHS. I dismissed it as a coincidence.
But now?
Now it felt like someone had been watching us watch them. I looked up, heart pounding, and that's when I saw him. A man, sitting at a booth behind me I hadn't noticed before. Average build. Plain clothes. Hat pulled low. But it wasn't his face, or a lack of it, that rattled me. It was the fact that he was holding something in his hands. A small, handheld tape recorder. Just staring at it. And then he pressed play.
I didn't hear sound.
Just saw his thumb move. But the way he looked up at me after, slow, deliberate, it felt like a signal. I turned away, my hands slick with sweat, and when I glanced back a second later, he was gone. Booth empty. No sign he'd ever been there. I jumped from my stool, ran outside. Nothing. Just the open road and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I called Emma's name and rushed to the restroom. She wasn't there. I ran to the back of the building, my chest heaving, my brain scrambling to make sense of it. And then I saw it. Her phone. Lying in the parking lot next to the car. Screen cracked. Still unlocked. A map app open. Zoomed in on a location 20 miles north, an old church outside a ghost town called Hollow Bend. Population 0. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and something in me broke open. This wasn't a game anymore. Emma was gone. And whatever took her wanted me to follow. The address on her phone wasn't a breadcrumb. It was a trap. But the only thing worse than walking into it was not walking into it. So I drove. Every mile felt heavier than the last. My thoughts were racing. What if I'd been the bait this whole time? What if bringing her back to that house, showing her that photo, digging up old files, what if none of it was an accident? What if I was leading her exactly where they wanted her to go, and I was too blind to see it? And who were they? Grace Holbrook? Henry Keller? The faceless man in the diner? Or something older, deeper, something that didn't operate on the same rules of time and memory the rest of us lived by? The road to Hollow Bend was cracked and overgrown. It felt like driving into a forgotten history, like the kind of place you don't stumble into unless you're meant to. The church sat at the edge of a dry field, its white paint flaking, steeple crooked like it had been watching the horizon for too long. I parked the car and stepped out, heart pounding so hard I thought it might snap my ribs. The front doors were open, just barely. I called Emma's name. Nothing. The inside of the church was wrong. Not just old or abandoned. Wrong star. The pews had been pushed into a circle, as if for a meeting, and in the center sat a single chair with restraints on the arms. On the wall behind it, someone had painted a phrase over and over, in thick black strokes. She came back wrong. I couldn't breathe. My legs went cold. I turned to leave, to run, to do something, and that's when I heard the music. A music box melody, faint, broken, echoing from below. There was a basement. I found the door beneath the altar, hidden, old, marked with that same word we'd seen on the map in the file cabinet. Return. I opened it. The stairs creaked with every step as I descended into the dark. The air was damp, thick, like it hadn't moved in years. At the bottom, a row of light bulbs hung low from a wire. Some flickered. Most didn't work. And at the far end of the hallway, I saw her.
Emma.
Sitting in a chair. Eyes open, unmoving, staring at the wall. I called her name. She didn't respond. I ran to her, dropped to my knees, reached for her, and that's when I saw the drawing in her lap. It was new, drawn in pencil. It was me, older again, standing over her, smiling, and beneath it, scribbled in small, panicked handwriting, "He's not who he thinks he is." Before I could even begin to understand, the light behind me snapped off, and the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. You still think this is just a mystery? Then you're not paying attention. Because I'm starting to think this isn't about Emma at all. It's about me. I stood there in that basement, barely breathing, staring down at the drawing in Emma's lap, and for the first time in this whole nightmare, I felt something worse than fear. I felt recognition. Not just at the image of myself, older, grinning above her like a shadow stretching too long, but at the handwriting beneath it. I'd seen it before. Not in old files or VHS tapes. Not in dream journals or mysterious letters. I'd seen that handwriting in my own notebooks. On the margins of old sketches I used to draw in middle school, the ones I forgot about until Emma and I started this whole search. But now it was hitting me like a punch to the gut. I had been leaving myself clues all along. Little symbols. Phrases I didn't understand. Doodles I thought were random. And now, in this freezing basement where Emma sat like a statue, I knew they weren't random at all. I backed away slowly, my hands shaking, my mouth dry. I called her name again, a little louder. Her eyes twitched. A blink. She looked at me, and there was this flicker of something behind her stare that didn't feel like her at all.
It was like she was seeing me for the first time.
Or worse, like she was seeing someone else. She whispered something under her breath, barely audible, but I leaned in, desperate, needing to hear anything that would anchor me back to reality. And what? Coming for the part of me I hadn't discovered yet. Because maybe, just maybe, I was the experiment all along. The basement was breathing, at least that's what it felt like. The air pulsed around us, Not in temperature or sound, but in presence, like the walls themselves had been waiting for this convergence, this final confrontation. I couldn't see, but I could feel Emma's panic next to me, the way her body trembled with recognition and dread. My mother was somewhere in the dark, and the footsteps, the slow, circling footsteps, were getting closer, as if whatever had followed us all this time had finally stepped through whatever veil had separated memory from truth. The entire journey, every clue, every twisted piece of evidence, every surreal warning, it had all been pointing toward this moment. But I still didn't know what I was about to face.
Or who.
I reached for Emma's hand. She grabbed mine like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to the present. And just as I tried to move, the lights snapped on, not all of them, just a row of overhead bulbs leading toward the far end of the basement, illuminating a hallway we hadn't seen before. My mother stood beside the first light, her face hollowed by grief, not fear. She looked at me with this resigned sadness, then turned without a word and began walking down the hall, step by step, until she vanished into the far room. I had no choice. Emma and I followed. The hallway ended in a chamber, larger than expected, industrial, lined with old hospital lights and machines humming with low static. There were beds along the walls, empty, each with faded restraints. At the center of the room stood a glass observation tank, murky with age and dust, but inside was me. A second version of me, floating, eyes closed, wires connected to his arms and temples. I staggered back, heart pounding, mouth open but no sound coming out. Emma gasped, her grip tightening around my arm. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a reflection. It was me. Same scar on the cheek from when I fell off a bike as a kid. Same crooked tooth. Same everything. Except older. Just like in the photo. And behind the tank, in the shadows, came a voice. Not one we'd heard before. Not Grace. Not Keller. Not even the whisper from the tapes. It was calm. Controlled. Clinical. You were never the original, it said. The man stepped forward, tall, clean-shaven, wearing a faded lab coat that bore the name Dr. A. Holloway. He looked familiar in the way only people from forgotten dreams do. He stared at me like a craftsman admiring a cracked sculpture. You are one of many, he said, his voice echoing against the tile. An attempt to separate trauma from consciousness. A living vessel for memory. But you wandered too far. My knees buckled. He told us everything. That Emma and I were once part of a childhood experiment, one designed to erase traumatic memory and transfer it to surrogate. A human archive. I was that surrogate, but something went wrong. The transfer wasn't clean. Fragments of her memories stayed inside her, and fragments of mine bled through. And over time, we found each other, not by chance but because memory itself has gravity. And some pieces of the mind, no matter how deeply buried, want to be whole again. You weren't supposed to meet, Holloway said, stepping closer to the tank. When you did, it broke the seal. You started dreaming, drawing, remembering, reconnecting. You weren't recovering your past. You were unlocking hers. Emma was crying now, not from fear, but from recognition. She whispered, the treehouse. That was where they separated us. Holloway nodded. That's why I drew the house, she continued. It wasn't yours. It was the last place I saw you. The tank behind him began to glow. Slowly, pulsing with a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. I felt dizzy, like the room was spinning around me. I asked him why we were here. Why bring us back? Why send the messages?
Why now?
Holloway looked at Emma, not me, and said, because her mind is decaying. The original subject was never designed to hold both halves for this long. You're the backup. But she's the key. Emma stepped forward, shaking but sure. She asked the question I hadn't dared to ask. If he's the backup, then who am I? Holloway smiled. You're the source. The room fell silent. That's when I realized. I wasn't protecting her.
She was protecting me.
All this time, I thought I was the one pulling her into my past. But I was a construct, built to carry the parts of her childhood no one wanted her to keep. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't even whole. I was a haunted house made of her forgotten pain, walking around in skin that thought it was real. The tank hissed. Lights flickered. The other me, the one inside, opened his eyes. And he smiled. Not the warm smile of someone waking from a dream, but the cold, familiar grin of a version that had never forgotten. The lights exploded. The room filled with blinding white. And then silence. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment.
No, Emma.
No Holloway. No messages. Just my bed, my phone, my apartment, as if none of it had ever happened. Except for one thing. On my desk sat a drawing of the house. And written in handwriting I now recognized as mine, clear, bold, deliberate, was a message. She's still in there. But now, so are you. I didn't leave my apartment for days. I couldn't. Not because I was scared, though that was part of it, but because I no longer trusted what was out there, or in here. Every sound felt deliberate. Every memory came with static at the edges, as if the footage had been spliced one too many times. But it wasn't until I looked into the mirror and stared at myself, really stared, that I realized something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't seeing the person I'd always known. I was seeing a reflection that looked like me, moved like me, remembered like me, but beneath it, I felt something unfamiliar. Not evil, not broken, just constructed. Like a house built from the pieces of a storm someone else survived. And suddenly it made sense why the memories never lined up. Why time felt bent. Why Emma had drawn that house before she'd ever seen it. We were always orbiting around each other, not because of fate or romance or trauma, but because part of her was me, and part of me was still in her. The experiment hadn't failed. It had just never ended. I tried to live normally. I even went back to work. No one seemed to notice anything had changed, not even my closest friends. But I noticed. I saw it in the way my dreams stopped belonging to me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat from scenes I didn't recognize, barefoot in a cornfield, lying on an operating table with a ceiling fan spinning too fast above me, walking through a hallway that looped like a maze until I saw Emma, only it wasn't Emma anymore. It was a version of her, watching me like I was the stranger. Sometimes I'd find drawings in my apartment that I hadn't made. Drawings of that basement, of the tank, of him. I stopped trying to throw them out. They always came back, folded into the pages of books, slipped under my door, stuck to the fridge with magnets I hadn't bought. Then one morning, a letter arrived. No return address, no name, just my own handwriting on the envelope, which I don't remember writing. Inside was a photograph, old, faded, torn at the corner. It showed me and Emma as kids again, standing outside that same house, smiling in a way that made my stomach hurt. And on the back, scrawled in ink that had almost bled into the paper, were the words, "The system resets when you forget." But you haven't forgotten, have you? I dropped the photo and looked around the room as if the walls were listening. And then something strange happened. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I felt peace. Because for the first time in my life, I realized the mystery wasn't meant to be solved. It was meant to be carried. Emma had carried it alone for years, possibly her whole life, without knowing what was real and what was implanted. And now it was my turn. That was the point of all of this. Not to expose some global conspiracy, or take down a secret experiment, or get revenge on Holloway. Those things didn't matter anymore. What mattered was remembering. Holding the story together. Keeping it alive. Because if we forgot, it would happen again. To someone else. To some other boy who thought his house was just a house. Or some girl who thought her nightmares were just bad dreams. And as for Emma, I don't know where she is now. I've searched. Tried every number. Driven back to Hollow Bend. More than once. But the church is gone. The field is fenced off. The records are sealed. And that basement? It doesn't show up on any blueprint, city plan, or satellite image. It might have never existed. Or maybe it still does, but only when the right people look for it. But I think about her every day. Not with grief, not with guilt, just with this quiet understanding that somewhere, in some version of this world, she's still watching, still drawing, still remembering. And maybe that's what keeps her safe. Or maybe that's what they fear most. Before all of this, I used to think of memory like a timeline, a straight path. But now I know it's more like a house, with secret rooms, hidden staircases, locked doors that only open when you stop trying to force them. And sometimes, when the light hits just right, you see yourself in a room you don't remember entering, living a life you don't remember choosing, wondering how long you've actually been there. So, if you ever find yourself in a dream that feels more like a memory, or a photo that shows you somewhere you've never been, but something in your bones insists you have, don't dismiss it. That's not your imagination. That's your other self reaching out, reminding you that the story isn't over. And maybe never was. Because some houses don't want to be left behind. Some memories don't want to stay buried. And some truths, once you uncover them, never let you go. Not ever. So tell me, when you close your eyes tonight, are you sure the life you wake up in tomorrow is the one you started with? Or are you already somewhere else and just haven't remembered it yet?